Alright, so this is the coding walkthrough video for Prototype 0.7. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, this is the big orbital update with the revamped orbital system. It uses different functions and mechanics to the previous one, and I've also added a couple more things to kind of coincide with it. For example, a new gliding system, because the old one didn't really work very well. So the new one's much better, so what I'll do right now is go through how that works in the game. Oh, wrong button. And then go through the code of it and how it all comes together. So first of all, I'll show you the new orbit system. So we'll head towards this pillar here. As you can see, you get lifted up into the orbit of the pillar there. So that's how the original concept of it was thought up. Basically, the player would get caught up in its gravitational pull, as you can see here. And then from there, they can use it to glide to wherever they choose. So if we get back up here again, get pulled back up, and then say I want to go this way, I hit glide, and off we go. So glide off, falling, and then glide holding shift. Gliding to the next orbital platform, which is over here, and using that slingshot back around. Oop, badly placed building there. Oops, and that one. But yeah, so the idea is, if we get back here, that you basically use them as an orbital slingshot, go up and slingshot yourself to wherever it is you need to go. So yeah, there's the gliding system in action as well there, which works a lot better than the previous one did. Oh, there we go, caught up in the orbit again, and off we go. Get between these buildings. The buildings are a bit badly placed in this prototype. They're not really made for this version of the orbital system, which needs a lot more of a turn-in circle than the previous one. So I'm going to move those around a bit, I think. God, narrowly missed that. But yeah, so I'm going to go through exactly what's been added now in this update, and all the code, etc. So the first thing I'm going to go through is the actual new system. It's actually quite simple. It's simpler than the previous one, but it actually, by being simple, it enables a lot of customization, so we can do a lot of change to it. So the first thing I did here was implemented a movement system, an upwards movement system here. So what that means is if the orbital system isn't quite taking you to the heights you want it to, provided you're holding space and the boolean here, which is called in these scripts here, is true, then you can move upwards and gain some new height, essentially. It's not really necessary, it's mainly just for me to test out how the orbital system works and if it's giving me enough lift to be enough, a good enough mechanic, essentially. So how the orbit system works is put here. So it basically utilizes add force and taking away transform positions in order to hone in on your position there. So yeah, the basic idea with this is that it takes the transform position of the object you want to be attracted towards, essentially you want the player to be attracted to, which is this one here. An empty game object here, which is about halfway up, well, 2/3 of the way up the building game object. So that's the attracted to object there, gets the transform position of that, and then subtracts your transform position, the player's transform position. So what it essentially does is sucks the player towards it in a gravity-like fashion. And then it also goes here and goes, is can orbit true? If it is, then add a force, which times the strength of attraction, which is this float here, times the direction, which is basically the sucking the player up towards it. So the strength of attraction is useful actually, because it's fully customizable, so it enables me to change how strong the gravity attracting the player to the top of the orbital platform, the building, is. So yeah, it's quite customizable there. So you might notice here these are separate, so you basically have to write a line of code for each building or orbital platform that I want. So that's for the first one, which is here, which is cube 1, and then you've got cube 2, which is that one there. So the old system, the previous orbital system, only allowed one orbital platform at any one time, because if you added 2, what it would do is attract the player at the same time to both objects, so the player would get attracted here and then kind of hover in the middle, because obviously there's 1 and 2 objects attracting them when it gets a bit confused. The same kind of thing was happening with this one. So what I had to do was essentially have specific directions and add forces called when certain booleans are true. So what that essentially means is each orbital platform has to have its own script, as you can see here. So disable orbital 1 for the first orbital platform, and disable orbital 2 for the second one, and then separate booleans which call the separate directions to move the player, essentially. That is currently the easiest way I've found to have more than one orbital platform. It's a bit messy, I know, but it's the easiest way I've found to get it going. Hopefully, over the course of the prototype development, I can find a much more refined and reliable way of doing it. So the disable orbital scripts are similar to how they were in previous prototypes. They've been a lot more simplified, though. So each one of these is attached to the orbital platforms, and it basically goes whenever the player enters the trigger collider, which is the sphere collider there, then make can orbits true. And if can orbits true, which is checked here essentially, then do the add force and attract the player. So it basically means that whenever the player gets within that orbital, that trigger collider there, they get attracted up into the gravity well, essentially. And it also makes can fly the boolean true there, which allows the flight, well, not flight, but the upward motion that I talked about earlier. So that's exactly the same for this one here, except the boolean is different, so that it doesn't activate both attractions at once. So rather than activating both, so you get the problem before when the player was stuck in the middle here, it activates them one at a time, so the player can loop around, go along here, activate this one, loop around, go back. It activates them at different times, essentially, and fixes that problem. So the last thing that was changed coding-wise this week was the moving script. Now, the biggest problem we've had in recent weeks is the gliding system. While we had one, it was quite unrefined and unreliable. Sometimes it worked really well, and sometimes it just didn't work at all. Sometimes, even when you were holding shift, the player would just fall to the ground, which is obviously not what we want. We want the player to glide. So to do that, I did a lot of research and decided to move away from the custom gravity and gravity scale that I'd implemented, and instead change drag, which is in the rigid body here. So what I've essentially done, it's a simple line of code really. When you're holding the left shift keys, increase the drag to 5, and any other time put it at 0. So what that essentially means, if I show you here, I showed you before, but just give it another go here. Get attracted up into the gravity well there. When the player is falling down, holding shift, and then they can glide. Falling and glide. It's a much smoother mechanic, and also feels quite nice as well, which is always good. So yeah. So those are the main changes for this week. We've got a brand new orbital system, which, while still unrefined and a bit rough around the edges, is much better, I feel, than the previous one. This one also uses gravity, or, well, not exactly gravity, but a gravity-like system, whereas the previous one used rotate around, which was always a bit buggy. But yeah, so that's what's been added this week. Next week will probably be refinement of these systems and basically heading towards adding animations and that sort of thing in the near future, hopefully.